I understand that completely. I do. Do you have a, was it a sore?
It was sore like Sunday and Sunday, but yesterday it was like this.
Just sounding ragged.
I don't know if we'll say today. I'm not
Missing one day is no big deal. 2, 3, start. That's the big thing about that. When you can miss history, you can make math, different things. So, two things. First off, you're gonna have to figure out how to kids quiz, trying those. We're coming up to the Civil War. Yeah, but you can't stop running.
I can't stop running. What if I fall? I'm gonna fall and shoot.
It's actually.
Like even soccer.
Oh, look at your shirt. What is it? Who is
Did you just know?
That should be a quartet. That would be a great band.
Have you ever went to school? No. I'll be gone Monday and Tuesday.
What's that?
I'll be gone Monday and Tuesday.
Well, we're going to have a test, probably a mini test on Monday. Well, because we have an essay test tomorrow, and so it's going to be a much shorter test.
Is it just going to be multiple choice?
Multiple choice, yeah,
Just
20.
Just multiple choice.
15 to 20.
And just multiple choice?
Just multiple
No short ID.
Just multiple choice. Because we're doing the essay tomorrow.
Okay. And then we're doing that on Monday.
Probably, yeah.
So just the test on Monday, and then what would be between?
So I'll get the exact page numbers and everything for you tomorrow. Just remind me. But we'll be starting the next, I think, chapter 13.
Oh, next unit.
Yeah.
And I'll just watch the video.
You'll be fine.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Let us begin.
Whoa, oh wait, no.
Lame. Now, Kristen, that's not what you said. Did you just realize that?
Yeah, they look like shit.
Is it popped in your head? Somebody knocked my camera down, so I have to move it this way. And people are getting more and more creeped out by the lips, so I'm enjoying it immensely.
Fuck yeah, dude, come on.
How about one thing to do with position? You've been gone for 2 days. So I can miss 3 days. All right. First thing is first, if you go on Teams, you don't have to do it, I'm just showing you. On Teams, it might say, essay test, industry. Gee, I wonder what that could be. It could be anything. Anything at all, AKA 2 questions. You pick one of them for tomorrow. What can you have tomorrow when you come into class? Outline and thesis. And remember the outline, 1 or 2 words. I won't count and. If you put down railroads and canal. But if you put down the railroad, you're out of here. I'll go check, not a big deal. And remember, you can have your thesis statement, 4-paragraph essay. The question, it's kind of broad. It's going to be, what are the factors of the Industrial Revolution? You pick 2. Pick the 2 that you feel the most confident to address. And you might notice one other thing. It says review list, Jacksonian era. So I gave you the review list for this era. But since we're doing this test, I went through and kind of picked through it. I reduced that list dramatically. I reduced it dramatically. So we're gonna have, on that reduced list, I just put it to you, I've already handed the list out. It will have what's gonna be on the test on Tuesday. And the test on Tuesday would just be like 15 to 20 multiple choice, maybe a couple matching, that's it. It's gonna be really basic. On the stuff we didn't quite cover here. So not very much on industrialization because we have the essay test tomorrow. Yeah. No short IDs on that test on Monday. So it should take you no more. I'm not kidding, 15 minutes. It's and I reduced the list dramatically so you can go back and just look at it online. Yeah. How many what? Ants?
Ants. You said we could like use this and this.
Oh, how many ants? I said ants. Why would you be talking about ants? What are you talking about? Who likes ants? Does anybody like ants? I've eaten ants too. They're crunchy.
Yeah, were you like 6 when you did this?
Huh?
You like 6?
No. I've eaten ants ground up in kind of flour. Yeah. One. None for you. You ruined your and window is closed. All right. So, where was the pizza from?
I don't even remember.
Were you there when you ate it?
No, they ordered it and they were just left over.
Them?
Yeah.
God, they're always doing stuff like that. I can't. That's why I don't trust them. Yes.
Is the reduced form the reviewable?
Yeah. Right here, and it should be down here too.
And then I thought the test was on Monday.
Didn't I say Monday?
You said Tuesday.
Why did I say Tuesday?
I don't know.
Monday.
Got it.
But it's just gonna be like 15 questions. I think I have like 9 multiple choice and like 8 action.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's gonna be really fun. It's gonna be a very basic one. Do you want it harder? Jay wants it harder, so we're gonna. No, I don't want it either. I want a nice basic test. So tomorrow you will turn in your outline, right? And I will walk through. And if your outline has too many words on it, or for you any ands at all, then I will take it up and rip it and you gotta redo it. Please don't make me do that, okay? I don't want to. And next, you have to have paper. And I know I'm giving too much. I'm almost making this too easy, but you can use line paper. I know, that's almost too much, right? Calm down. Don't expect that next time. So, bring a couple sheets, make sure you have a couple sheets, you have your outline on a separate sheet of paper. We'll turn it all in. The essay questions are up there. There's going to be 2 very good questions. And think about your body paragraphs are the 2 topics you come up with that you could do the best short ID on. And lastly, don't forget context. Things that led up to it outside of your body paragraph. So it's the industrialization things that led up to it. And a couple of the factors of it I gave actually kind of led up to it, like it started in Britain. That kind of thing. All right, let's go take your notes up and let's get to, because we're still right in the middle of women. Were we right in the middle of the holiday?
Yeah.
What holiday was created? Yeah. The secular version of Christmas, which is worldwide.
She's not working on it. I just needed it.
David Sedaris? Which class is this in?
APUSH.
I'm a big fan of David Sedaris.
No, we just been writing on it.
I'm a big fan of David Sedaris. Met him a few times.
You've met David.
Oh, I'm very worldly.
Yeah, and Mitchell's class, they started writing prestige based on his writing.
He's awesome. He's done readings in Helena and Missoula. Oh yeah, he's great. Yeah,
We started writing prestige.
he's really big. He's big deal.
Really? I didn't hear about it.
Was
Stuff on them?
I was doing my David Sedaris book.
Were you just for me? Boy,
You're moving on.
you're kind of a suck up, aren't you? What David Sedaris were you reading?
We've read like 4.
Oh, then you write your own.
Yeah, we read like Understanding
He's
Owls,
great.
Our Perfect Summer.
He's also Yeah, it's pretty funny. The stuff he wrote to my wife and his, and then he signed books for her sisters and her mom. And the stuff he wrote was.
He's quite the guy.
I can't tell you in class what he wrote. Okay, let's go and get to, what is the name? Why not? Because I can't. I can't tell you because I don't want to. How about that? Here we go. So, what was the name for how the Industrial Revolution led to this basically making up a role for women? What was that role called? Yeah, the cult of domesticity. And what happened? What the value of a women's, what kind of value for women and status for women changed? In what? What's that? It's what is it? Yeah, that economic value changed dramatically. Not so much of their status. Whose value went up? Men. And one thing, whoever has higher status, for the most part, they will do whatever it takes to keep that higher status. They just will do whatever it takes. And they'll do whatever it takes to keep their children that higher status. And we can, I think, understand that, but also know that's what's going to happen. And this is the Industrial Revolution. We got to, what is it called? Where the Industrial Revolution and the development of capitalism, transportation revolution, and new finance. What was that called? What kind of revolution was that? Someone said it? Yeah, that's the market revolution. And going through all that changing role of women. Oh, and then yesterday, if you were gone, I went over how, opening paragraph, what we need there, that kind of thing. Is that on your watch?
I'm checking my rings. Just see how many steps I got right now.
How many steps?
It's not
I average about 44,000 steps. I made that up.
I mean, I would be surprised you like walk around the same circle.
I do walk around.
Like you just go there and then there and then there.
Yeah, I walk over here. Yeah.
You'll go to like the first.
I grade that way too. You'll find this out when you get the essays back when I walk and I grade. You'll find out what that does to my handwriting.
You'll go to the lights on and then turn it off.
Yeah, you just like have this odd pattern.
Do you count them? Do you count how many times I do
I
that?
should count that one. That other sounds like here.
Did I tell you where Santa Claus came from? So we got right here. Let's get to women's rights then. And so the women's rights movement, women's rights came out of the loss of rights. And it started with middle-class women, which were the first class of women in America, same thing happened in Britain, that were this called the domesticity is being imposed on them. And remember this idea of women's sphere was the home to bring the moral upbringing? Well, here, its idea would be, okay, if we're supposed to be responsible at home, why not every place else? Why should we stop here? Remember, women's ambitions have to be limited to getting married at home, and the moral upbringing of the children. They should at least have the ability to go beyond that. So why not all of society? If women are the pure and noble elements of society, shouldn't they reform the rest of society? But this is also kind of an action of, well, we have no place else to go. Remember, a woman, according to the cult of domesticity, is a failure if they don't get what? Get married, and then have a family and that. Total failure. You can imagine how women, as anybody would, shape against this. So, reform movements would be involved with women. The abolitionist anti-slavery movement, there was abolitionists, the temperance or the controlled drinking. There was a prison reform movement to make it like some kind of, instead of just kind of this arbitrarily punishment, to actually like give like terms of sentences, or have reformatories where they would reform prisoners by keeping them in solitary confinement. I'm not saying it worked or smart, but that's what they would do. And then they started looking at, wait a minute, if we're worried about the others' rights, like freeing slaves, what about us who are virtual slaves, especially as laws begin to change? What about equal economic, legal rights, political rights? Well, they looked at it, economic, legal, political, but especially economic or legal, that's government. They make the rules. And so voting became the key. And that's actually from the 1890s, not voting. And they would take the name for the women's suffrage movement in Britain, and what they were called in Britain, using the thing where they would take something that is male-oriented, and for women, they would add an "et." So the suffragettes. And that would be for women there, which is really weird. But I can still remember when women's sports, women's athletics came about after the Title IX Act of 1971. There were no girls' sports in schools or colleges until 1974, 1975. And I can still remember the first teams, but like Capital, they went to Lady Bruins. That was for the girls. And Helen High went to the Bengals, which makes no sense at all. Bengals are just, that's a tiger, but they were the Bengalettes for years. It's just weird.
Like just the name is up.
But it's also implying one's above. That's kind of implying that it's inferior. I was a cowboy in high school, Miles City, Custer County Cowboys. So you can imagine what the girls' team was. Yeah, the Cowgirls. I'm really surprised that they didn't do Cowboy-esque, but they went Cowgirls. So, three of the main leaders of the women's rights movement, one of the first organizers of it, a brilliant organizer, Lucretia Mott, married. This is kind of about relatively, it's unclear how happy that marriage was. A lot of these marriages would be by convenience or organized or arranged, especially middle class and upper class. Probably the most charismatic leader was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, brilliant in a very strong marriage. We know that because her husband supported her effort for equal rights. And then the tireless fighter who was younger, who idolized Elizabeth Cady Stanton, even though kind of shaved against Stanton's cautiousness, was Susan B. Anthony. And Susan B. Anthony, for the rest of the century, would be a tireless fighter, would be world known for fighting for women's rights. But I should add, the issue of race would get in the middle of this almost immediately, color of skin, and the 19th Amendment, which would give women the right to vote. The right to vote could not be taken away from women in 1920. It's, I think, very correctly known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. We will come back to women's rights. I want to introduce it as part of the Industrial Revolution. And the first women's rights convention, so leapfrogging where the women's rights movement began in Britain. The first one would be in the United States, in upstate New York at a resort at Seneca Falls. And the beginning of the document at this women's rights convention, their statement of resolutions said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. From what document were they taking that from? Not common sense. Declaration of Independence. Even though common sense has helped, but the Declaration of Independence is almost verbatim where that's from. That was taken from common sense. Even though there's an element of that, but Jefferson had wrote that before. And it was mostly women and some men, but no African American, nobody but people of full European descent. The only African American man was the very young Frederick Douglass, who was a brilliant fighter there, but that's it. And the main demand was for suffrage. The idea being is once women got suffrage, they could influence the rules and the laws for economic and political rights. It'd be a 72-year fight for voting. Even though some states would adopt suffrage before, Montana adopted suffrage in 1914. So before the 19th Amendment. The first territory to bring back suffrage for women after it was taken away was Wyoming. Wyoming Territory. It's complex, Wyoming did it. You didn't even know the first state to allow women to vote. Again, after it was taken away back in 1820s. It was Utah. And Utah did it because of fear of people who were not Mormons coming in, thought that they would vote like their husbands. And so there was a political reason. We will come back to this, but Montana would be the first state to elect a woman to the United States House of Representatives. Who is that woman? Anyone know? One of the most famous Montanans. Montana, every state puts 2 statues in the Capitol. One of Montana's statues is that person. Yeah.
Jeanette Rankin.
Yeah, Jeanette Rankin. She'll be elected twice. We will come back to Jeanette Rankin. Anybody know the other person? Montana's most famous artist. Yeah. Anyone know? Charles Emerson. So, there's going to be a massive backlash against this fight for rights. And immediately, the fight is going to be that women are going against their traditional values. And don't forget, these traditional values are brand new. It's a cult of domesticity, which is brand new. And there's always going to be a backlash against women's rights. So the initial, yes, we're going to fight for suffrage, and then would be attacked by men and women who were ingrained in the new cult of domesticity. We'll see the same thing in the 50s and 60s and 70s. This is actually a British cartoon, but it's the ladies trying. They're the ladies trying to basically come into Parliament. And if you allow women into Parliament, they'll do things like sewing clubs and playing games and browbeating men. It's very sexist, but implying that women can't do these jobs, which is kind of amusing if you think about it, because clearly men make a significant number of mistakes too. So, not only women's rights and the change in the family, by the way, it would be a great topic for a paragraph on your essay question. Did I just blow your mind? Anybody want to guess what the other questions? Some of you already saw it. I put it up last night. You didn't even look last night? A couple people did, yeah. So, there's going to be massive religious upheaval. Every single time there's economic insecurity, there's religious upheaval. Every single time. Because people began to become very afraid, become insecure, and much of modern Protestant Christianity that people think about today is going to come out of the Second Great Awakening, and it's going to start in Britain. But one thing we have to get to, a number of churches try to become more open and less kind of fire and brimstone, heaven and hell. And these would soon be known as liberal churches. And these liberal churches, a lot of them started from the old Puritans. And they accepted empiricism, which is like the technology, the science. They accepted capitalism. And unlike the early Puritans, they said there was a loving God and that everybody had potential salvation. This is not what's going to really be the big change. And so, here's one of the Unitarian churches. So we talked about deism before, but the Unitarians, the Universalists, the deists, and this one spread elsewhere. Every single time there'd be equivalent when there was an industrial revolution. The Congregationalists would come out of this too. They would come out of the Unitarians. And so you want to look for Unitarians or Universalists in Montana, it's the Congregational Church. These are all over, like when I was in Vermont, these are everywhere. But the Second Great Awakening, I know, I went fast. But the big change, the big religious change, will be the Second Great Awakening. Did everyone good? Good. I am good, thank you. The Second Great Awakening, that is the big religious change. We already had the First Great Awakening, but this is the Second Great Awakening. And this was a pure reaction to, just like the first one, all the disruption in society, all the fear, all the insecurities that was led to by the wage system, but also the new technology. This really terrified people. This new world, and either it's already making their life different and insecure and more dangerous, or they can see it coming. And if you see something you don't really understand coming at you, it makes it even more scary. A similar thing's going to happen in the 1920s. We'll see it again in the 1970s and 1980s. And in certain parts of the country, it's happening now and going against away from the mainstream Protestant faith. So what it really stems from is a wave of nostalgia. This will also be called Romanticism. And going back to when things were easier, we'd have to worry about railroads or things like that, the good old days. And this is the essence of what Edmund Burke is going to call conservatism against the French Revolution, going back before all these people wanted their rights and they knew their place. And so that is the essence of conservatism today as kind of a philosophy. This is not a dictionary definition. We're talking about a movement of philosophy. And it's to kind of go back to the past, but not the way the past really was, to the way it should have been. We'll cherry pick what we liked about the past. So we don't want to go back to the past, we just want the elements we liked. And everyone's going to be different on that. Josh?
These are all stuff I'm saving.
I have so many old files.
Just look at that.
Yeah, we'll put it in there. Sound good? Anything we recycle, recycle. Because I have like duplicate copies of everything. So this is the element of conservatism. This going back and looking back at something. And we have these elements all the time in history. So the 1920s, they want to look back to the 1890s. During the Great Depression, they look back to the 1920s. In the 1970s, they went back to the 1950s. Oh, weren't the 1950s great? People knew their place. Before civil rights and women demanded equal rights. That was the backlash. I mean, Ronald Reagan would bring in a wave of conservatism, and his campaign slogan was, does anyone know? Let's make America great again. And Donald Trump would do the same thing. Today is horrible, back before was great. Let's go back to the way it was before. What was it like before? Well, we cherry pick. We cherry pick what we liked, or at least we think we liked. So, it's the same element. They did this religiously. And so they were at first kind of fringe religions, but would become mainstream starting in Britain, but quickly spread to industrial America, the Baptists and the Methodists. And the Baptists we've best known as adult baptism. The idea being you can't be baptized or believe until you're an adult. Most religions baptize people until they're child. The children, if you're not old enough. And they would quickly spread. I should add the Baptists would split in the United States right down the middle. Right down the kind of, what was it? The what did? Oh, yes. And that would start, yeah, that would be the end of the
Oh, it was recent. Started in 1970. Even like how it didn't reach into like the early.
And you can still see the United Baptist. I mean, the Methodists are really interesting. And next, so they had these big tent revivals, evangelical revivals. And this is going to happen in Britain, the United States, and then spread throughout the continent of Europe. And you see the same things when the Industrial Revolution is going to be imposed all over the world. So we're going to see this all across, let's say, colonial Africa, too. And the people look at this world and it's insecure. And they would have these tent revivals outside of the mainstream religions. So outside, let's say, Lutheranism or Catholicism. And people would go to these and have these itinerant preachers, meaning they're not directly ordained in one faith. And they would quake in ecstasy, they would sing, they would cry out, they would faint, they would speak in tongues. It was really dramatic. And it was very emotional and personal. It wasn't, this is what we must follow, like the Catholic Church, especially then, very much dogmas, we must do these things to be saved, or the Puritans reading through the Bible and deciding we're blessed. Lutheran is a little bit closer to Catholicism. This was personal, a personal salvation. By the end of the century, you might have heard this term, born again. Born again, or accepting a kind of fits with the Baptists. As an adult, you can accept this salvation. And have you ever heard of the rapture? The rapture, the actual term would come about in the 20th century. But the idea was created in the Second Great Awakening. Actually, created in Britain. They came over. All reactions to the Industrial Revolution. This world is scary. But when Jesus comes back, this is very Christianity, and there'll be judgment day. Those who believe will be brought up into heaven. And what's going to happen to everybody else? Yeah, fiery hell. And that is the rapture. The term will come about, it's going to be called the wave of, the term will be fundamentalism in like 1911, 1912. And the term for the end is near and judgment day is coming is millennialism. The end is near. There's a couple of different types of millennialism, but the end is coming. And the end might be coming as in like a metaphorical end. We must be right with our faith. Or the end might be just, boom, judgment is made and either heaven or hell. And it's still very prominent today. Millennialism is still really prominent. And here's the point then. If the end is near, what does the material world matter? What does it matter? What matters? The spiritual life, the afterlife. And the benefit from this is you can imagine how people scared about this world, scared about the difficulties of this new wage system, the insecurity of now, if you lose your wage, you starve. It wasn't like that before. At least it didn't seem like it. Or for that matter, all these new technologies replacing our jobs. That's really scary. Or what about if the wages are low because there's so many unemployed people and you can't feed your family? That's really scary. This might provide comfort. But who else might benefit from workers not complaining about their conditions in the workplace or their wages? Who's going to pay for these tent revivals? They got to get money from somewhere. Well, behind the scenes, capitalists will jump in. The brand new capitalist class is going to help pay for this. Don't complain now about your job. All that matters is the afterlife. Similar things are going to happen like at the fall of the Roman Empire. Excuse me. Feudalism. We'll see this a number of different times. This is one of the ways they try to control slaves. Don't complain about your work now. Someday you'll go to heaven. And so, it doesn't mean, I'm not even making a value judgment on that, but like everything else in this world, it's not black and white. Somebody might also be using people's real fear to profit. And the burnt over district of upstate New York would be one of the most prominent areas. All these are different, all kinds of different sects would pop up. Like for example, the Florists or the Millerites popped up here and quickly spread. And there were sects of Protestant Christianity, and they were seen as outside the mainstream. The Mormon Church popped up and had its real big growth in upstate New York, and they were seen as fringe and not even Protestants, and now they're actually very mainstream Protestant, but that's going to come down the road. And there's going to be a big reaction against the mainstream churches against these new churches. But also, it's no coincidence that Seneca Falls is right there. It's no coincidence in this area of upheaval. And look at all these red dots. Those are abolitionist churches. That's where Frederick Douglass spent most of his time. When John Brown wanted to organize an armed insurrection into the South, we saw him at the end, or we'll get to him here in a couple weeks. He was in upstate New York. And they're Shakers. I mean, it's unreal. We're going to jump right to this. There are a few of these fringe Protestants. In fact, that's where the term cult comes from. Is Christians, the Catholic Church, saying other churches aren't real Christians, but cults. We have a different meaning now, but that's where it's going to come from. For example, the Shakers, the Millerites. I'm not going to explain the cult of Matthias. But the Shakers were a faith who they would go into this kind of religious ecstasy where they would shake and quake and go into almost like a seizure. And here is a marriage ceremony of Shakers where they would do this kind of reaction and they would quake and rock against each other. They also did not believe in marital relations. And so they believed you were going to get married, but they did not believe in sexual relations. So I'm just going to make it very clear about this. The Shakers died out. And if you're not sure how that happens, go talk to your parents or your health teacher and ask. Something involving the stork, I'm not sure. It's sciencey. But the Millerites were another one who were millennialists. I don't want your question.
It's not about that.
Yeah, what is?
Why don't you talk about the whatever you said was?
I decided not to tell about us. Now just because I can pick one story. I'm telling you the Millerites. It's one I put down if I wanted to or not. Which one I wanted to. Okay. So the Millerites, they were millennials. They believed the end is coming, but they believed the end. They picked a date, March 18th, 1844. And Joseph Miller, who said the end is here, and told everybody when the end comes, be ready for it, because we are all going to be taken up into heaven. So wear loose clothing and go up on your roofs. And there were thousands of Millerites who were really excited about this. The world is terrible. I'm going to go up on my roof, and this is a cartoon mocking them. And they went in loose-fitting white gowns and sat on the roofs to wait to be taken up into heaven. Well, because your clothes are going to fall off, right, when you go up to heaven. So you want something loose-fitting. That's logical, right? Now, of course, you might be thinking, wait a minute, you have the power to bring you up. You don't have the power to take off any clothes. Don't bog yourself down. And another thing, what's going to happen to everybody else?
They're gonna laugh.
Yeah, fiery hell. Well, guess what happened on that night? They all went up on the roof. And here's mocking them, going up. The morning came, and there wasn't judgment. And that's why the Millerites called it the Great Disappointment. They were so sad that hundreds of millions of people didn't die in a fiery hell. Darn it, I wanted to laugh at them from heaven. Okay, I just find that very amusing. By the way, you lose a little credibility when you predict the end of the world, and everyone's so excited, and then it doesn't happen. He picked 2 more dates, and finally the church will kind of die out, but there's still Millerites around. And some became more mainstream that started as called by the mainstream church cults, the Seventh-day Adventists and the Church of Latter-day Saints or Mormons. And I'm not going to give you much detail about that now. We will talk a little bit more about Mormons because it's so much involved in the West after the Civil War. But they were not considered to be, in fact, by many mainstream Protestants, they were not considered to be Christians. And so they would eventually be forced a number of times to move to Utah. And one of the big reasons would be, we'll tell more about later, this is mocking it, but it's plural marriage. The multiple wives. So, we will come back to that. We're doing the Industrial Revolution now. Another reaction would be a movement called Transcendentalism that actually, once again, started in Britain, but it also spread to the continent too, where they could see what's coming. And it focused on the power of the individual to go above the fray, above all this money grubbing or factories where everyone's just concerned about wealth and greed. So there's going to be all these artists. This is a German artist. A lot of just one man standing above the fray. Or like a lone tree in the desert or one iceberg in the sea. The power of the individual to get above the greed and griminess of society today. And Transcendentalism, then the idea to get away. Transcend is to go above. And this is going to have a lot of influence. Ralph Waldo Emerson, there's Emerson right there, is given the credit for this, but I got to be clear, he's copying British called Romantics. And he feared the new capitalism. He feared the new technology called empiricism. And this was Romantic. And Romantic is that very similar kind of conservative idea, this nostalgia, to go back to the way it was. Now, there were Transcendentalists that were not necessarily what we would say conservative, but that's the idea. It's a conservative idea that comes from a reaction to the French Revolution. Weren't things great? And so you're going to see this real idea of the Transcendentalists to go back before we had all this science dictating our lives, before Newton and the scientific revolution. So they'll draw paintings of of medieval castles. And that's a Roman aqueduct, even though it's kind of misplaced, but it's a Roman aqueduct. Or nature, to go away. And it's no coincidence that this is going to be the era where we're going to get the first kind of horror stories. To go back to these, away from where science couldn't dictate it, where it's supernatural. One of the greatest novels of this kind of transcendental romantic thinking. Some of you probably read, I don't know if you read Frankenstein? Has anyone read Frankenstein? I think you might. It's a good story, but it's very medieval, but it's also about the fear of what science is doing to people. Dracula's another one. And also, it's no coincidence, this would lead to science fiction. And science fiction, the escaping the world today and going to someplace else. And a lot of science fiction is, even though it's implying it's some kind of future or different technology or world, it's looking back at Earth. Some of the best stuff. And I like all those. I like some good horror stories. Most of them aren't very good. And I like some good science fiction. But, by the way, what's good? What?
Understand.
No. What's good? Stuff I like. If I don't like it, it's not good. Isn't that right? Who agrees with me on that? Things I like is good. Are good is good. All right, so. No, I've never read that. Is it good?
Yes.
Would you trust you? Would you trust you? Think about it a second.
Yes.
See, I don't know.
Yes.
So, transcend this world. Go beyond. What happened? Oh, was that infected? I'm sorry.
It's been months.
Oh. I know people that have wisdom teeth. Sorry.
That's like my wisdom.
And now every time you move, it just touches you.
I didn't shoot the
No, it doesn't hurt. It's just swelling. It's just a little sore.
Oh, so it's not too bad. That's good.
But I hate that it swells up so much.
Sorry. Yeah, wisdom teeth. It's okay. So transcend the imperial world. Go to nature. It's no coincidence. Started in Britain, then it's come to the United States. All of a sudden, you have people leaving the new urban areas and go take hikes, climb a mountain. Before the Industrial Revolution, why would you do that? I mean, why would you climb a mountain? Now it's like, I'm leaving, I'm going, I'll do this to get above, to get away. And I have elements of this, and I bet all of you do too, and that comes from the Industrial Revolution. And things like sport. That's when people learned how to swim. Would be here. No one really knew how to swim. They actually kind of made it up in the 19th century where you just kind of flop around. But hiking, running, they would kind of go back to this. It was a way to transcend the factories in the imperial world, to go back to nature. Now, what was nature? Not imperial world. But I actually have one thing. What kind of people could do this? What kind of people could say, I'm going to get away from these money-grubbing, greedy people and go. People already have money. You got to have some money to do this. If you need to survive, you can't do this. So these are very elitist. Okay, if you have to work, you might be able to escape it for a day, but people do this full time. Yeah, it's money. Emerson was not poor. So those are the transcendentalists, the romantics. To give you an idea of that, let me give you one of the greatest transcendental romantic artwork, and it's also one of my favorite artists. Turner is just fantastic, but it's trying to show the disruption of society. Now, obviously, a flat painting on a screen won't give us what a real painting when you see it. For oil painting, you can see the texture of the painting, which makes it just so much come alive. But here you have the countryside, but it's being disrupted by this cloud. And here comes a train, and it's technology, bringing in just a wave of change. That's the smoke. And what's it covering up? You see the Roman aqueduct, the Roman bridge, a little rowboat, and that's being crushed. And this fear the new technology, fear the monster. And that's how he draws the tree. The painting's about the size of this wall. It's at the Tate Museum in London. It's just like, wow. And here's another one. We have to get the Hudson River School. So the Hudson River School would be this transcendental romantic art reaction to the Industrial Revolution, and it was started in the Hudson River. And Church was probably the best known. He had a big, kind of a artistic enclave called Olana. And so he would draw these pictures of nature as nature's being transformed by the Industrial Revolution. So you can escape the city and go look at, here's the one that made him the best known artist of the first half of the 20th century, or 19th century, this relatively unknown Niagara Falls. And all of a sudden people are like, oh God, we got to go to Niagara Falls. It's part of the reason why this would become one of the first nationally preserved areas within a national park. We got to save this because what's happening, everything's being destroyed. It would be the second national park. What's the first national park? Yeah. And here's a couple more of his, and it's romantic. You know, it's the iceberg into your bone. It's really cool. Okay, I like art. I didn't really like it until I actually started going to museums. There weren't a lot of art museums in Miles City. I know what you're thinking. Miles City, of course there are. And that's his in South America. So, Henry David Thoreau is probably the most famous transcendentalist. And he would write on civil disobedience. If you're taking AP language, you will read or have already read this. I know they read it. And sometime during the year. And what he wrote is, we must disobey unjust laws. But civil disobedience. And what he was saying was, he wrote it as the Mexican War was a war of conquest. And we should not obey unjust laws. Now, the big thing for Thoreau is that he would later on say it was for the noble goal of not spreading slavery. He just didn't want the people he thought were his inferiors telling him what to do in government. He was very elitist. But this would have great influence. It would have great influence on Gandhi and, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. And the movement. People know who King is, and that's why I used him, but King was just one cog in many fighting for civil rights. And that is a quote from Thoreau. He tried to make a utopian society called Oneida. And I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately. That really fits in that idea of getting away. I can learn from nature. Now, so much of our society is just going to be created out of this. And then people will think it's always been like that. So that's Thoreau. Another movement was the temperance movement. And that is the slow down or the anti-drinking. And this fit in with two main causes. First off, a lot of the Second Great Awakening, many of this new religious fervor was anti-drinking. Some completely against a prohibition on alcohol, and some at least slow down drinking. And the idea would be that drinking will affect your relationship, the spiritual relationship. But also, we talked about this before when I showed you the drunkard's progress, what it's doing to families. And this idea of, one wage, and now, if there's one wage and we're consumers, this cartoon shows it pretty well, this poster. Drink is taken away from children's food because we only have one wage. But there's something else. The temperance movement will be funded by capitalists because they want to control workers' lives outside the workplace. They don't want hungover workers or workers drinking and not showing up at work on time. So they want to control workers beyond the workplace. We talked about this with Lowell. And this is going to lead directly to, this is what I'm desperately trying to get to. Oh, almost forgot. Carrie Nation would be one of the leaders of the Prohibition. She would be temperance and then Prohibition. So we got to Carrie Nation. Carrie Nation was best known by the 1880s and 1890s of going into bars with axes, with a hatchet, and attacking the bar. Women didn't, with the Industrial Revolution, women did not go into bars or taverns unless. Yeah, unless they had a job. And I think you could probably guess what the job might have been. And so the idea would be only men. That was women are pure, remember? Women are pure and have got to be away from this. That was all created out of whole cloth. So women really did not go into bars unless they worked there, unless they had to, until Prohibition in the United States. But it was like this in Britain and France. Germany never really had that. Russia never really had that. Italy never really had that. That is more of a little bit further west. Carrie Nation was a big one. So the Women's Christian Temperance Union would push for people not drinking and would become very big People would have a little card, you'd sign it. Here's Women's Christian Temperance Union. Hey, where's that? That's right in front of the Episcopal Church, right near Women's Park in Helena, Montana. Yeah, the church that's still there, right there, that's in Helena. Montana would have prohibition in 1918. Before prohibition, the 18th Amendment, Montana prohibited alcohol. Did people obey it? Kind of. Okay, so this led to the Protestant work ethic. I had to get to the Protestant work ethic. The Protestant work ethic will be another big reaction to the Industrial Revolution. And this concept of, okay, how do you convince people to do what capitalism needs? Well, they put this idea that true Protestants, they work hard not because of a wage, but to go to heaven. Nobody cared what time it was until the Industrial Revolution. Punctuality. Punctuality, not because you required you for a job, but that is a way to go to heaven. And temperance, same issue. And all of these, I would argue, are good and noble goals, especially now. We live in the world of the wage system. If you are late, you're going to have a very difficult time in life if you're unreliable in your workplace. I know many people have been fired because of that. You might know people who have been fired for being unreliable. So you got to know these things. But you can imagine how workers resisted this. They don't like being told what to do. Especially workers, like, we're working our tails off and you're telling us we're not working hard. Especially, you have that, you see, read that down the bottom, Catholic immigrants. Catholic immigrants, because this is the Protestant work ethic, it's implied that the Catholics don't work as hard and that they're drunkards, and they cannot be reliable, which of course is garbage, but that fits in with the anti-Catholic bias. And you can guess where this is going to come from. Capitalists are going to push this, and it's going to lead to nativism. Remember, we've mentioned nativism once before. Tomorrow, you get to write all periods, aka 40 minutes. You got 40 minutes. I don't think it'll take you more than a half hour. Is everyone? Hey, oh, one more thing. I will check, maybe 8:30, maybe a little later. But if you put on Teams your thesis, and I have time to look at it, I'm going to try, but there are some things I have to do tonight. I will let you know if I think it's a good thesis. I'll give you some constructive criticism. Like, do better. No, I'll tell you if you don't have a good plan. So you can post it. If you don't post it, my assumption is you feel pretty good about it. If it's too late or I can't get to it, I will for sure check in the morning. You can't make that. You can't. Well, you win. One of the great mysteries of how developed. Oh, I thought you were going to have a question. No. I was all ready to answer. I have answers. Some even correct. Yeah.
Thoreau's neck hair reminded me of Calhoun.
Who?
Thoreau,
That was a style.
it just reminded me of Calhoun with how aggressive it was.
I should have said something. But
I thought you were going to, but then you was like, and then you had moved on before I could.
Well, you asked one of the things I'm going, and then I had it in my head, and then forgot. But you're
I know,
right.
the entire time I was sitting
style.
there, I was like, he looks like John.
Remind me again. I'll show everyone tomorrow.
That he looks like John.
Friday.
Okay.
I saw you yesterday.
Why did orientation take 3 hours?
Oh, why took 5?
Dude, no, and because I'm going to be working